6:42 is our time here on Sky 99.5 FM, and we've got some news making to do before this hour is over. On the line with us is a senior attorney at law and a member of the Police Service Commission, Martin George. Good morning to you, Martin George.
Morning, Martin.
Morning, Edison.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes, our colleague Marcus Romero is in studio with us this morning.
Oh, hi. Good morning to you, Marcus.
All right. Now, Martin George, we've got a couple big things that we wanted to get through this morning. The first of which is the big talks that will be held between the opposition leader and the Prime Minister tomorrow afternoon at some point. You've had a chance to see the agenda as indicated by Prime Minister's office. Do you think that that's a reasonable agenda that's been put out there by the Prime Minister's office?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't want to categorize it in the realm of whether it's reasonable. The point is whether it is relevant to the most urgent priorities of the people. You know, when you listen to the people and you hear the commentary, you hear what people are concerned about in terms of, you know, where they make their voices heard either on the radio stations and programs such as this, or, you know, in the newspaper, in the opinion columns, or in the letters to the editor on social media. And you know, I maybe I am living in a different country, but to my mind, I would have thought that the crime and the state of insecurity in the nation would have been number one on the agenda. And it appears that it didn't even make it there at all.
Well, Dr. Rowley says that, you know, crime is going to be dealt with in, in those pieces of legislation that they intend to discuss. And he pointed to the anti-gang legislation. Right. They'll be able to discuss it within that context.
Right. What happens is that from the further explanation that I have seen is that I think the thinking from the OPM was that, you know, what they want to deal with is matters on the legislative agenda.
Yes.
However, I would think that if it is that you're talking about such pomp and ceremony in terms of, you know, a meeting between, you know, a formal request for a meeting between the
two of them,
Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition, then I would think that you don't just limit it to the legislative agenda, because at the end of the day, while Ms. Prasad Bisesa is the leader of the opposition, she certainly would still have to consult with her other parliamentary colleagues. They would have to have caucus. They would have to speak to, you know, their party chairman. So there's very little in terms of the legislative agenda that I think that she can, you know, really commit all her members to unreservedly without at least still going back to them, even if it's just for the courtesy of, you know, having some kind of discussion with them. So I am not sure that this by itself, if it's going to be limited to just items on the legislative agenda, that it's going to really achieve anything significant. I would have thought that we would have dealt with items on the national agenda, you know,
but I think Dr. Rowley had indicated early on that when it first came up, that he did want to, and they have been signaling for a while, that they want to meet with the opposition to talk about what's coming up on the legislative agenda. So this should not have been a surprise to anybody.
But just listen to what you're saying. If he's saying they want to meet with the opposition, then that's different from meeting with the opposition leader alone. So in other words, then you're talking about what you should have had basically is a team from the opposition with a mandate from their, you know, full membership to say, okay, look, these are the pieces of legislation. And that you're talking about is a working session where basically you then have to go through the drafts of the legislation. You know, they would come with their propose changes, and you sit down in maybe a 3-day, 4-day session, and you hammer out the differences, and you say, well, okay, look, we will agree to this clause, but no, not that. That is what would be a productive meeting, but this will end up being nothing more than a show and a sham if it is that you're talking about this being a discussion and legislative agenda. I can't see that they're going to get into that kind of detail in this meeting. So then you ask yourself, what is the real purpose and purport of it? I thought that we were going to sit now as leaders to discuss policy issues in terms of, well, hey, listen, on the major issues concerning the country, what would be our common policy? What is our joint policy, separating apart from the politics and the hubris of the cut and thrust of opposition politics? Let us at least both come up with some kind of policy positions that we can both, then issue a joint statement to say, well, okay, look, this is what we agree to. You see that happening all the time in mature democracies, but to say that you are focusing on the legislative agenda, and I saw the first item on the list, internal self-government for Tobago.
Yes.
I mean, quite frankly, even for Tobagonians, I really don't think that's their most pressing concern right now. Their most pressing concern is trying to get the sea bridge and the air bridge fixed so that they could get some proper means of going back and forth. That's their most pressing concern. So I wonder, again, which country some of our leaders are living in that they seem to be so disconnected, so utterly divorced from the reality and the sufferings and hardships of people on the ground. I was at the Piarco airport yesterday, Jessime. It was a disaster.
Wow.
The airport in Tobago, people were sleeping on the floor. I saw people sleeping on so many hours they had been there. They were just lying on the floor sleeping.
So both the sea bridge and the air,
airport.
so both the sea bridge and the air bridge have collapsed.
Crisis right now. They are both in crisis. So it just seems. Let me tell you, you have a feeling that this whole thing is just so surreal, and you feel like maybe you're in a time warp, and this is not your present reality, because you who are on the ground, if you walk and talk with the common people, the man on the ground, that maybe some of our politicians need to do that, then they would understand. If you as Prime Minister had to go and sit and be in the airport there for 10 hours waiting to get on a flight, then maybe you would understand what the ordinary citizens go through. And
but the reality is that he's not going to be forced to wait 10 hours for a flight.
No, but you see, that's the point. He can opt to not be given preferential treatment and then see what it really is like. Then you would understand. So, it just it boggles the mind that in the midst of all this chaos, you are now, raising these, lofty, esoteric ideas that, you're going to sit with the leader of the opposition and work out the legislative agenda.
Dr. Rowley's agenda is very blinkered. He's going to speak with the leader of the opposition on matters that would need the support of the opposition. Mr.
Right,
George.
and the point is, yes, I know, I think he's made that quite clear. But the point is, Edison, the reality is that he's hardly likely to come out of that meeting with the leader of the opposition saying, well, yes, we give you carte blanche support on these pieces of legislation. Obviously, the way to get something like that done is to actually go through the drafts of the legislation, and you must have basically a caucus coming from the opposition, maybe 5 members, a caucus from the government.
No, it's going to be a private meeting,
down,
a very private
that's
meeting.
Right. And you sit down in a working session, and you actually have to go through the relevant clauses. That's the only way you can get any kind of agreement and stuff like that. The leader of the opposition is not going to be so reckless, if I may dare say so, as to just go into that meeting and say, well, yes, we will agree. And I mean, even if she does that in an act of recklessness, then that's not a word that you think you ought to place reliance on.
Because I get the impression that the leader of the
opposition
opposition will have one person with her, and maybe the Prime Minister also.
That's just a note taker. It's just a note taker. It's not a member of her parliamentary team. It's a note taker.
But remember,
that's what she's been limited to.
Remember, they have met before. They met last year. Both of them having delegations to discuss anti-crime legislation and anti-crime activity. They did do that, and then government brought things to Parliament. Yes, but then government brought things to Parliament, and they had a dickens of a time trying to get it through. I guess this is why he's trying this route now, to make sure that they get agreement and consensus in advance before they make another attempt.
Right, but what I'm saying is, Jessime and Edison, is that if it is that with a delegation they were not able to agree, do you really realistically expect that the leader of the opposition on her own is going to be able to just carte blanche agree and bind her entire party and the entire opposition and saying, well, yes, we agree to all these pieces of legislation? I hardly think that is going to be the result. So you ask yourself, what is the purpose of this, except that you're doing it for the optics, to make it appear, well, I have tried to be reasonable. I have tried to reason with the opposition. So let the blame fall on them if these pieces of legislation don't pass.
And I'm certain you've heard the tone of the Prime Minister.
I love that you use that word, because ultimately, for politicians, it always is about the optics, isn't it?
Of course.
Oh,
So as I
my
say,
word.
it may be for that purpose, but at the end of the day, the people of Trinidad and Tobago are getting increasingly restless and frustrated by the fact that it appears to be that so many things are just breaking down in this society on a daily basis. You have the judiciary in a mess, you have the air bridge a disaster, the sea bridge a total failure, and you wonder, where are we going economically? We've heard no clear economic plan in terms of the government saying, well, look, okay, we're at the bottom of the barrel, people. Work with me. All right. These are the steps. 1, 2, 3, 4 that we're going to be taking initially as our short-term measures to start to climb out of the barrel. This is what governance and leadership is about. You are supposed to chart the course for your people to get the way out. When you look at Singapore as a model and you ask yourself, you say, well, look, how were they able to achieve what they did? It is by clear leadership and having a fixed plan, and you say, listen, this is it, and basically the nation has gotten on board with it. I have been in Singapore, let me tell you, down to the taxi driver, the people working on the streets, they have such pride for their country, and they're so happy to tell you, well, look, the reason why we have so strict laws in terms of littering and, chewing gum and this, that, the other, is because we want to keep our place clean for us and for you, the visitors. They speak of everything with pride. The port in Singapore, let me tell you, it stretches for miles and miles and miles, and you're just seeing thousands and thousands and thousands of containers, and big ships are just turning around, non-stop. I mean, and Singapore, remember, is a quarter of the size of Trinidad. I keep reminding everybody of that. It's a very small nation, so therefore, size doesn't matter. In a scenario such as that, it's your vision, your leadership. They have no natural resources. We are blessed with natural resources. We are much bigger than them. What is happening in terms of our governance structure and our governance model? That is where the problem lies.
It probably just boils down to vision. And speaking of vision, we got the news over the weekend that no man's land was quietly handed to government to do with as it wishes.
Yes, well, I saw the news in the papers on the weekend. I mean, it wasn't news to me, but I guess for the general public, it was certainly enlightening to realize that was the scenario. And I think basically it appears that in the vicinity of no man's land, and I am choosing my words very carefully, in the vicinity of no man's land, I think that is the area that is earmarked for sandals. So maybe they have found a way to not trespass upon the protected areas and the wetlands, because in fairness, and this is what I keep saying, we must always be balanced in what we see.
Yes.
And in fairness to the government and in fairness to the persons at Sandals, we must remember that CLICO, through its company Occidental Limited, right, which is a CL financial company, right, they had already gotten all the approvals, EMA and everybody, for their development in the same area. The point is the persons who bought into Saman Grove will know this, right? They had development plans. I mean, I've had those plans in my office for years. They have a whole big booklet showing how they were developing a 5-star hotel, a marina, a golf course, everything in the same area. So, in fairness to the government, environment, and this is where, I always like to be balanced in what I am saying, it's the same site. And when CLICO got their approvals, they had to have public consultations, etc., and nobody objected, nobody made any fuss. So therefore, I have always maintained, and I still do, that it is possible to have economic development while still preserving your natural environment. It is not rocket science anymore as to how you do these things. What you do is, apart from designating the areas, you then now pump the resources and finances into developing. Say, for instance, you might develop the area into a marine biology conservatory where scientists from around the world can come study your wetlands, develop it, find ways of, making it more fertile, more fecund in terms of its richness and its diversity, its biodiversity. So the point is, we must be able to take our heads out of the sand, and move away from the simple banal positions of saying, well, that's our area, we're not allowing any development. You can allow development in certain parts of it. You can restrict the development and ensure that the developers themselves contribute to enhancing your natural environment in a way that is sustainable and beneficial to all.
Mr. George, the main artery from Point Fortin going through Vance River, Libre, and so on, which are P&M constituencies, I got a call this morning that from 3:30 there is a fiery protest because of the state of the road itself. What is significant, I'm saying, is that these are P&M constituencies, and look what happened in Point Fortin last week.
Well, the thing is, Edison, I appreciate that fact that, persons have to resort to protesting, but, I would still even move it away from the fact that there are P&M constituencies, because at the end of the day, the government has a responsibility for all constituencies in Trinidad and Tobago. And, I guess it highlights the point, as you were saying, that it's worse that these are P&M controlled constituencies. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't let them off the hook by simply saying, well, look, even in a P&M constituency, I will say in all constituencies where there's neglect and, there's lack of proper infrastructural development. When the history of Trinidad and Tobago is written in time to come, we will never be able to account for the billions of dollars that have passed through this country and the lack of corresponding infrastructural development that is manifest throughout the land. There's decay all around, in the sense that things are not being maintained. Our stadia, if you look at them,
yes.
Look at the Brian Lara Stadium. Look how long that was left to rot, where they had to replace.
And the same thing's happening with the
beams
Couva
and all
Hospital.
kinds of things. That's right, the Couva Hospital. You look at the Hazy Crawford Stadium, the Jean Pierre Stadium. All these things, we are not really acting in a mature, rational manner as a country that wishes to develop. We keep talking about we want to achieve first world status. I think we need to start realistically try to achieve third world status first, because right now we head into somewhere closer to fourth world status. And this is the reality that the people on the ground are seeing, and it is just amazing that our leaders seem to be so oblivious, and they just seem blinded to these things.
Martin George, we're going to leave it there for now, but thank you for giving us time this morning. We appreciate it.
Always a pleasure. You have a good morning.
Thank you.
And you too. And that's the first hour of the Breakfast Roundtable on Sky.